For the month of October, we'll be covering some of the greatest, and perhaps not so greatest, horror films ever crafted. Do they live up to their scares, or have they lost their fear factor over time? We continue this week with our monthly look at the works of Alfred Hitchcock, namely his 1960 blockbuster, Psycho. The most successful and perhaps well-known of his works, Psycho has inspired generations of filmmakers and helped kick off the slasher subgenre. After watching it, you'll no doubt ever look at daily hygiene or motherhood the same way ever again. So we've talked about a number of Hitchcock films already. We've talked about North by Northwest, starring Cary Grant. We've talked about Vertigo with Jimmy Stewart. We've talked about The Birds, somehow before we talked about Psycho, which is, quite honestly, is his most universally known film. If for most people, Psycho is probably the first and, in some cases, possibly even only Hitchcock film that they saw or have ever seen. This is literally following on the heels of a big budget spectacular such as North by Northwest. So he goes back to these lower budget roots with Psycho. I think you both had seen the film, or at least portions of the film, before this. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, me being the buff that I am when it comes to horror movies, I definitely saw this flick a couple times.
I hadn't seen it from end to end, but I had seen clips of it from my dad watching it or whatever.
You know, funny enough, Psycho wasn't even my first Hitchcock film. I saw North by Northwest and Rear Window and a lot of his other big films before I saw Psycho, possibly because I was very much aware of Psycho. I was already aware of the big twist, both big twists. So it didn't really pull me until much later when I said, okay, listen, if I'm going to tell people I'm a Hitchcock fan, I have to watch Psycho. And from the very first note of Bernard Herrmann's epic score, I was drawn into it, and I understood why this film has reached the acclaim that it has. Well, you know, it's kind of funny that you mention seeing it from end to end, because this film was kind of infamous at the time of release, that they wouldn't allow people to walk into the theater after it started. They even had cardboard cutouts of Hitchcock with his finger on a watch, mostly because they didn't want anybody walking in late and saying, where's Janet Leigh? She's the biggest star of the movie. She's gone. Where is she? He didn't want anything to spoil the overall effect of this film. I mean, Hitchcock went so far as to try to purchase as many copies of the novel so people wouldn't know the twists going on. Unfortunately, this is actually both an unfortunate thing and a very fortunate thing, is the fact that its most famous scene, the shower scene, has become a cinematic staple, but it also reveals one of the biggest twists of the movie.
From my perspective, I was more familiar with the shower scene than the movie. Granted, I have no context that Janet Leigh was the draw, when it actually came out. The exhibit that used to exist for Hitchcock at Universal, back when it was just Universal Studios, and IOA was just an awkward three letters that didn't make any sense together unless, you were on Wheel of Fortune and decided to buy three vowels at once, whatever. But they actually broke down how the shower scene was done, and then they mentioned, the chocolate sauce thing that at some point, if Demos didn't, it would have to be mentioned anyway, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The punchline being, I was more familiar with that scene and the entire rest of the movie. So to see that up front, I'm like, oh, she did. Now that I have that in there in context, my reaction was, Psycho moves faster than any other Hitchcock movie we've seen to date. It gets up on its legs pretty quick, and then it does it again by, oh yeah, there's this plot and there's the $40,000 and all this, like, ooh, and really as the leading story before the twist to the actual movie, air quotes, that we've come to realize in the Hitchcock films thus far. Not only was this the quickest transition, I would argue that it was, for me at least, the most intriguing of the bunch. Doesn't mean it was the best overall story or movie. I don't know if I'm prepared to say that just yet, but we'll get more into that part later, I'm sure.
There is a very clear-cut drive to this film, not just with the way that the story plays out, but really in the making of the film. He made this in 1960. Well, it came out in 1960. The studios didn't believe in the film, and so he ended up using his television crew from Alfred Hitchcock Presents, filmed it at a very, very low budget, was able to basically parlay a deal with Universal and Paramount to release the film. He gave away the rights to his usual directorial fee in return for 60% of the gross, which they gave to him because they didn't think it'd be a big success. And in today's money, Hitchcock netted about $150 million from the success of this film.
Can you imagine him pitching that to the work? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was a fine effort on recording tonight's tale of suspense. But unfortunately, I'm going to have you come in on Saturday. That would be great.
What I'm saying is that the film really did, and there's a reason a lot of studios balked at the time. It really pushed a lot of boundaries. This film was released in 1960, and today the MPAA has re-rated it as R. The fact that, yeah. It's a rated R film, although I think that's ridiculous that it's rated R. I mean, by today's standards, it really ought to be G with how much violence we see nowadays. But the fact that this film was able to push so many boundaries, it really was one of the first steps to the changing face of cinema, especially that happened with the sexual revolution and the dropping of the Hays Codes in the 60s. And this kind of upfront attack of violence mixed with sexuality that this film presented on screen was unheard of and very controversial at the time.
Ultimately, what it does for the viewer, or at least what it did for me, is I'm watching it and I'm seeing the knife coming down and I'm seeing her trying to protect herself, but the knife continues, you just see him just continue coming. So, she's catching heat. And then, just the way that they played it with the blood going into the water, like I honestly believe if they had filmed that now, it would be like much more blood. And it actually could have been a lot more considering how many times she got stabbed. But I misremembered it to see, Mother walk out and then she's still alive, slumping over and actually trying to get out of the tub when she finally keels over and grabs the curtain. I thought that was straight. I mean, I like the way she acted that as well. I thought she did a good job.
Has its own charm in all its horrific. Okay, perhaps charm is the wrong word, but it definitely fits the scene well. The atmosphere, music when she's driving and doing all that is very well done, and keeping with the theme of sound and audio here. The whole thing of her having the internal dialogue of what the people will say when they realize I got the $40,000. I read it, bitches. And like all their different reactions. And I'm sure if I were in there somewhere, that's right, I saw it. I knew she could steal it. That's right, I saw it.
I love the little devious smile that she gives as she's thinking about it. I thought that was a really nice touch. But I'm glad that you brought up sound and especially the music of that scene, because Hitchcock originally was going to play this scene with no music. And that was epic fail.
Well,
and Bernard Herrmann, the composer, one of my favorite composers. Obviously, I already have talked about him on Vertigo and Northwest. This is my favorite of his tracks, and I don't think many people would dispute me on this. But he wanted to experiment, so he showed Hitchcock his version, and Hitchcock ended up doubling his pay and said that he was 33% responsible for the success of this film. And I buy it. The music for this film really elevates and really drives the propulsion of this story, I think. From the get-go, you're hooked.
Bernard, I don't know who Demosthenes is, but he's going to have to put in a beep for something, because that music is f***ing awesome.
This is the first time I've actually had to censor Alfred Hitchcock.
This is one of those movies where if you cover your ears, I don't think you're scared. I think the sound plays a major part in you riding the roller coaster for, get your drink ready, the experience. If you don't have the music with this film, it's not the same.
Psycho in many ways is considered one of the very first, if not the first, slasher film.
Yeah.
And I kind of guess it runs in Janet Leigh's family because her daughter ended up being the star of her very own influential slasher film, Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween. So
That's what they call her.
Shut the front door, man.
Jamie Lee Curtis, daughter of Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis.
That is crazy. I love Jamie Lee Curtis.
But beyond that, let's talk about the film as a whole. It's the character of Norman Bates. I'm noticing that TJ has his Bates Motel sign, and I think that's a towel as well.
It's an actual shower curtain.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's an actual shower curtain. It's got blood all over it and everything. I mean, I thought it was only appropriate that I break it out for you.
That's a further burn. She died with product placement.
we making money on that.
But the character Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, a role that forever typecast him as the weirdo in many other films, including one of my favorites, Murder on the Orient Express. But I digress.
I love the way that he played the character. The first time I watched it, I legitimately thought that there was another person there. I thought that he was involved, but I didn't. I thought that there was somebody else there because I took the conversation that I heard between the two people as being a legitimate conversation. I mean, his woman's voice sounded believable. He sounded like a cranky old woman that had a bit of a smoking problem. So yeah, I was with it. I thought that I'm not going to say he was innocent, obviously, because he covered up her murder, but I still thought that he wasn't the one that did it. I just thought he had a very athletic, scarecrow-esque looking mom that was going around stabbing people.
The book takes that cheat to a higher display where they actually have pages upon pages of them actually having conversations in the book.
Ooh, okay, yeah, that's kind of that's a good device by them.
Yeah,
that's almost. But depending on the execution, that could be a good device.
It's one of those devices that clearly doesn't translate between mediums.
Listen, the beauty of it is when Anthony Perkins comes on screen, you think this is some chess club reject who's just socially awkward. Well, no, that's not it. He's just a mama's boy, apparently. Well, that's unfortunate. Ooh, but the rebellion. He brings her a sandwich. So, of course, she had to die. But I mean, that sentence in itself, listen, this movie isn't called Warm and Fuzzy. It's called f***ing Psycho. Of course that's what's going to happen, okay?
If he didn't work, if the character of Norman Bates didn't work, the second half of the film, not even the second half, the last 2/3 of the film would have completely crumbled because the first third with Janet Leigh as the main star, as the main character, is gripping. You buy into her plight. And the moment she disappears, if you don't have an immediate, possibly more interesting replacement, the whole film crumbles.
They did such a good job of going with Norman and him doing everything in his power to keep his secret. After a while, I forgot that we were even looking for her, and I'm wanting to see who else this cat is going to have to take out to keep his secrets.
When mother turns around and you see what's going on, your face, God damn it, is an appropriate response. Like the only way it could have been more of a slap is if the cadaver's arm swung up and slapped me right in the face while the chair spun around. Now, granted, like she barely pokes her in the chair, turns around. Okay, maybe it's a shitty chair. I'm fine with that. Goodness knows that miracle of modern motion is something I can tolerate far more than the end of Vertigo. But got that shot in there just for you, Dino. But yeah, there is no way that the movie didn't climax again with that delivery. But as much as we don't like the therapist, I shouldn't say, well, no, I'm going to say it. I didn't care for it. The actor did a fine job delivering the deposition there in question, ironically, because he's being questioned by the law. See what I did there? But that data dump, listen, that's done in other movies, and it's just completely pooped all over for anybody who remembers The Architect and The Matrix Reloaded. Anyway, so the point being, there's an awareness by Hitchcock of the outside world experiencing something like this for the first time and taking that little extra step. But knowing that this deposition is there, that this data dump is there, and it basically kills the tone of the huge climax you have, he takes you back inside for what I thought was the best bit of acting in the entire damn film, and he doesn't say a word, by the way, Anthony Perkins delivering that final little crooked, yeah, smile. Oh my God. And that was just as scary as somebody getting stabbed in a bleeding shower. Okay. Bad choice of words there by me. But the punchline being, constantly, I have been critical in the movies with Hitchcock so far to literally say the man does not know how to handle a climax. And that all changed with this movie.
I like the way that the final reveal is done with the swinging of the light bulb, adding a lot of motion to that scene. You mentioned in our last episode with The Exorcist about how its tone had that of a beating heart, and I think that's very much on display, oddly enough, with this corpse. The scene with Norman coming out in the full getup, I kind of like how short it is. Sam Loomis comes in and just subdues him. There is a realistic element to something that for a lot of the audiences, I think at the time would have been a hard concept to grasp. The sexual deviousness that's on display in this film was kind of unheard of in mainstream cinema. They were even attacked by the censors at first for even using the word transvestite, and they only were able to use it because they said, "Hey, it's a clinical term." Oh, okay, I get it. The explanation from the doctor at the end has been credited by many to be the worst scene in the film. Some people are going as far as to say it's the worst scene that Hitchcock ever filmed. I don't agree with that. There are some other weaker Hitchcock films. But does it deflate the film by that point? Yeah, it does. I understand why it's there. I do find this doctor's credibility strained in that the fact that he's only had him for observation for what? An hour? Let's just be nice and say a day at most. And he's able to come up with all that shit?
Mama Bates talked a lot during that hour, bro. Okay.
And he wasn't sure that it was an act. This guy's pleading insanity. Anyway, okay, let's just brush that aside. The movie wasn't gonna say flash up like 5 weeks later. Nope, Although the film did start with an oddly specific time motif that I never used again any other time in the film. But I agree with you, Kyle. I think honestly, what does save that is the final impression you get with Anthony Perkins. You also mentioned in Exorcist that one of the things that you found insanely creepy about that film was the flashing demon face. In some scenes, the face was composited on top of Regan's as well. This film has a version of that. The final shot of Norman, they superimpose the mother's skeleton, her skull, on top of his face, making that smile at the end far, far more creepier before it transitions to the car coming out. If you didn't catch it, that, my friend, is subliminal messaging.
Yeah, I did not catch that.
That is what you see. And I did even myself rip the therapist scene because I didn't think that it was necessary. But one thing that I can say is going back to Norman in that room, he saved it because he showed that everything that lawyer said was the absolute truth, because this cat is not saying a word, but we're hearing the conversation that is going on in his head and it is mother. And like, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And to see his facial expressions going along with the conversation. So you're like, okay, this is legitimately the mother having this conversation through Norman's body. So he saved the last 5 minutes of that
it was
film.
Antithetical. It was antithetical to the way that Hitchcock composed his scenes. Hitchcock was he was very famous for showing and not telling, and this was like a 5 minute long. Well, it felt like it was 5 minutes. It's probably a little shorter. But it felt like a 5 minute long, drawn out lecture that he's trying to root something that is quite ridiculous in a very antiseptic, clinical way, and it just kills it. If it had ended there, I think that I probably would have felt the way that you oddly feel about Vertigo's ending, which I still disagree with. But cutting to Norman at the very end, it delivered an additional punch, an additional. I think that in retrospect, that one scene at the end makes the whole film vastly creepier on rewatch. Because imagine that's all the conversations that you heard. That's what you were seeing. What you're missing.
Yeah.
Come to mention it, what did you think of Janet Leigh? Did you buy into her plight to steal the $40,000, which I guess today would be anywhere between $360,000 and $400,000?
Right.
She was in love, and they had that special kind of lust too, man. Because at the beginning, I was really feeling the interaction that they had. Like when you're feeling somebody when you're having a conversation, and the kisses are the punctuation to your sentences. I was especially engaged when she was getting chased by the cop. Like no BS. Like that's a trigger right there for me. So when I'm seeing her getting followed, like I'm just like, oh man, why is he doing this? I mean, yeah, she's a criminal, but he's got no reason at all to follow this woman at all. And then all she wants to do is go buy a car cash. And the thing that gets me weak is like, look, bro, she's white. She should be able to go and buy a car cash with no problems. But she's getting heat from a used car salesman. Dude's like, man, maybe you should take this around the block for a little bit. No, I just want to give you $700 and this car and get out of Dodge. Man, look, I felt her plight, and then I felt for her when she was gone. Like, that's the thing about this movie. You get invested into her character. You want to see what happens. Is she going to live happily ever after? Is she going to get away with these 40 stacks? And then it's like, she's dead. And now I am looking at Norman like, what's going to happen with this dude? And fortunately, because he did such a good job with the role, I was still in the movie.
You know, it's kind of, you say that, and I'm suddenly sitting back and thinking, wow, I didn't realize The Psycho was one of Hitchcock's most romantic movies. But there is a voyeuristic quality to that scene. I mean, think about the way it opens. We literally go in through the window and you witness this, and it kind of parallels the scene later where Norman is looking through the peephole. Knowing Hitchcock, there's almost a joviality to the voyeurism. He's inviting you to do this with him. I thought that her inexperience at being a criminal and making herself look as guilty as possible, even when she's buying a car or just driving from one state to the other. Once again, also a very good parallel for later with Anthony Perkins when he's also falling apart and being questioned. What did you think of Sam Loomis?
I was with the way it was kind of set up, and it was dangerously close to just Sam looking like, another one of those dudes that's just taking advantage of another hat blonde to get whatever it is he needs. But then you come to find out he's far more likable, invested in this whole concept than even maybe he realized. Once he finally had the opportunity to get over himself and his ego for 30 seconds, being poor with a hot woman who cares about you on your own is a better decision. If you don't believe me, just read the letter that he was about to deliver to Janet Leigh's character. He was incredibly likable. I feel like once you got past that, no one who's a criminal or a villain, particularly in movies, has hair that dashing. So when the private investigator comes in and starts shaking him down for stuff, somehow you still know, by way of actually having witnessed the crime, in fairness, that he ain't even trying to understand what's going on. He has no idea.
He looks exactly like Archer, the TV show. Here's a funny aside. There was an angry father that sent Alfred Hitchcock a letter. Apparently, his daughter had seen 1955's Diabolique, which was another thriller where somebody got. Let's just say there was a scene in the bathtub, so I don't ruin that movie, because we might cover it. And then his daughter saw Psycho, and of course the scene in the shower. Apparently now the daughter refuses to take a shower or a bath. What can I do? And Hitchcock replied to send her to the dry cleaners.
I was gonna say stop letting your kid watch horror movies, but that's
why you gotta be practical, TJ. Jeez.
All in all, do you guys think that Psycho is required viewing?
I'm going to say that it is required viewing, and the reason I'm going to say it is because we're not going to talk about all the other sequels that it inspired, Psycho 2 and the reboot with Vince Vaughn, which is an absolute spit shot of this one that was just done horribly wrong. I will pay props to Bates Motel, because that show, I actually like that show. Freddie Highmore did The Thing. So the reason that I'm going to say it's required viewing is because it did inspire Bates Motel, and I thought that was a great show. But the movie was really great. I mean, I felt like for what it was, the time period that it was, the music being so integral to the movie, delivering the way that it did. Hitchcock was ahead of his time with his storytelling, and it's something I'm really getting into. So yes, Psycho is required viewing.
So here's the thing.
Uh-oh.
This movie is not the best Hitchcock movie I've seen. It's not. North by Northwest is a better movie. I had more fun watching it. Vertigo, despite the flaws in the ending of the movie, is a better movie. I had more fun watching it. It's better than The Birds. I have no problem saying that. And all three of these movies I've also declared not required viewing. But by now, get your shot glasses ready. As much as Demosthenes uses the foundation argument, I am forced and compelled to do the same here. Thank you, TJ. Well done. The score being what it is, how many other scores have copied that? The shower scene being what it is, how many things have copied that? So not only is it something, oh yeah, and the effing shower scene had an exhibit in a friggin' theme park. Of course it's required viewing, because if you're doing anything to be around, near, or toward the study of film, this movie is in the textbook. Is it the best movie of a horror movie? Hell no. Exorcist is a better movie, but you have to have consumed Psycho to get a number of societal references and to truly be a movie fan.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Many people consider Psycho to be a horror film. I don't think it's a horror film. I think it's far more of a thriller. Does it have yeah, I would consider it a thriller. People, I've seen trivia. What's Hitchcock's first horror film? Well, I'd make the argument that the closest you get to a Hitchcock horror film is, funny enough, The Birds. But even then, even then, I think it'd be up for debate. So The Exorcist is far scarier than Psycho is. I think that Psycho is a far more taut film. It's far more economical in its storytelling, not just its budget. Is it my favorite Hitchcock film? No, it's not. It would definitely be in my top 10. But with the exception of The Birds, every other one that we've covered on the show is... Actually, with the exception of The Birds, every other one that we've covered on the show, it competes for number one between Northwest and Vertigo. I can't wait to introduce you to some of the other ones in future episodes. It's definitely required viewing. In the same way that North by Northwest, what it did for the contemporary action film, Psycho did for the contemporary slasher thriller film. But yeah, by all means, it's required viewing. Don't watch it before you take a shower. Or a bath, apparently. Just get dry cleaned. So that was tonight's episode of Psycho. Thank you so much for joining us, TJ. It's always nice to have you on board, not just for horror films, but also for Hitchcock, and it's always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me as always, Kyle, brother. I'm glad we agreed on this one. This is my time of the year. If you can't get wet for Halloween, then you just don't have a soul.
Where can we find you to get more wet? Wait.
Yes, please. Ample wetness. The drizzling don't stop. You can follow me on Twitter at TokyoJ, TOKEOJ. Same thing on Snapchat if you want to see how I'm living. Got great things in the pipe, man. So I'm super excited. Talking Shiz on Thursdays. Dinner time every Tuesday with that beautiful human being right there, Kyle Nash. And every once in a while, I'm just dropping a podcast just so I can talk about current events with whoever wants to get down. So holla at your boy.
Of course, I am Kyle Nash, the student of the game. You can find me on Twitter at the SOTG. You can find me on Instagram as the same, the SOTG. You can find me on Facebook as the student of the game. And of course, check out my coverage of the UCF Knights football year. Man, listen, 2018, they're still undefeated going into their latest game here. Check that out. And then check out my coverage of the Miami Dolphins every Saturday. You'll get the Dolphins Dive telling you all the storylines for the coming game. And then, of course, I'll drop some observations for you after the game is over on dolphinswire.com of USA Today.
Fantastic. You can find me at hilaritybydefault.com, where we just have fun stuff every week. On Twitter, at Default Hilarity. On Facebook and Instagram, Hilarity by Default. And join us next week, where we continue our look at Halloween films, or horror films, when we take a look at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.